Let's be honest, a video about tilt-shift lenses is too niche for you. There's loads of videos down at the side there. Just go watch one of them, you'll be happier. For those of you that have got this playing on the computer and you've walked away from it but you're still listening to it, tough luck, you're stuck listening to me talk about tilt-shift lenses, particularly why I'm getting rid of the last one I own. Let's get into it. Because of the kinds of work that I do, I use a sort of variety of lenses, stuff that maybe you don't always see. If, for example, you're a photographer, you're probably not going to use one of these. This, not the greatest photography lens, but great for video. This lens that I'm using right here, not a super common lens, kind of an expensive lens, not something you'd see often, but very useful. How do I show this? This is an ultra-wide lens. If you don't photograph, I don't know, architecture, you might not know why you need one of these. This guy, little vintage guy, fun, not super practical. You've probably all seen one of these, 70 to 200, a macro lens. So some lenses are more common than others. Some you'll see all the time, 24 to 105. I'd say most professional photographers have touched one of these at least at one point. And then there's something like this. This is a really interesting piece of, I'm gonna say camera history, because in all but the most specific of cases, these are disappearing. Canon used to make a whole lineup of these for the E mount. They don't have any for the RF mount. Nikon don't appear to be making any new ones. Sony don't make one at all. But what are they and why do I have one? Why would anyone have one of these? Well, I take pictures of products. I started off taking pictures of architecture, which is kind of just a product but big. With products, you very often want to control where the focus is and the perspective of it. So for example, in fact, let's put this on the camera and I'll show you. Let's take this kind of published studio yellow. I want to take a picture of this, but what I don't want to do is tilt down. Because whilst that doesn't look like it's done much, this line and this line are now converging at some point. I mean, I think. It's hard to know without putting some lines on the screen, so let's do that. But if I get this camera nice and level, I can then shift the lens down. And here is a truer representation of that product. Hello. This is where we start running into issues of ease of use. Why? What? Okay, so maybe that's a bad example because, well, it's not particularly extreme. But that's what this lens does. This lens, not this lens. It helps correct for perspective shifts. A camera on a level plane will give you vertical lines. That's a very simplified version of what it does, but that's what it does. If you tilt the camera down or up to fill the frame with the thing that you're trying to photograph, you introduce perspective issues. Lines will start to do this or do this. I can't really do that very much, but this or this. This lens, because of its optics and the way that they move around, will correct that for you. You can leave your camera pointing straight ahead, but move the lens, and because a lens like this has a much bigger image circle than a standard lens, this will let you use all of that image circle. So you can effectively move which bit of the image appears on the sensor because you can move the optics. That's not the only thing this lens does. That's why I got one of these in the first place, because I was taking pictures of architecture, and because I learnt to take pictures of architecture using a large format camera that had the option to do all of this. I thought that that's what I needed. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, sometimes it is exactly what you need. And I think if it is what you need, you know it's what you need, then you go out and get something like this. The problem I find with this lens is it's niche, but it's also limited in its appeal to that niche. What the hell do I mean by that? What I mean is that it has a fixed focal length. This is 45mm. If you want something wider, if you want something tighter, you need to buy a whole new lens. Well, that's not really a problem. You have to do that a lot of the time with other lenses. The 100mm macro is a fixed focal length. It's a macro. But then if you want somewhere around 100mm tilt shift, you need two lenses of basically the same focal length. I did used to have the 90mm tilt shift. I didn't really use it that much. The other thing, the other limiting factor, is that this is not the best example of the capabilities of tilt and shift. A couple of things wrong with it. It shifts and it tilts on a fixed axis. I run into this more often than I would like. So what do I mean by that? Well, there's not independent control over the tilt and shift, or at least the axis that they work on. So if you want it to shift this way, boop, 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 and tilt, you can't. They run perpendicular to each other, and that can't be changed. So if you have shift dialed in and you wanted to tilt in the same plane as that, you can't. The other limit to it is it doesn't tilt or shift very far. Before I mentioned the large format camera, that could move any part of it as much as you like. Now, part of that is because of the image circle, but it's also just a limitation of building it into a little box. A convenient little box that can go on your DSLR. There are ways around this. There are ways around all these limitations. Hasselblad, in their H system cameras, which are really expensive, they offer a tilt shift adapter, and that is something that goes between your lens and the camera body, and it gives you that tilt shift functionality, meaning you can put different lenses on it. Now that has its own flaws. It doesn't have a bellows system. You run into some of the same issues as the little box. It only goes so far. It does change the focal length of your lens, the effective focal length of your lens. But what are you gonna do? Trade-offs have to be made. Some photographers use technical cameras. These are either adapters or mechanisms that go between a sensor and a lens that give you as many movements as you need. Cambo, Actus type things. They're great, kind of expensive, but they do away with a lot of these limitations. They are slower. They are very much a tripod-based system. I'd say all tilt shifts are kind of tripod-based systems. So what's got me talking about tilt shift lenses now? Well, that's my last one, and I'm going to get rid of it because I just don't really use it anymore. I did take it out the other day. I took it out and took some pictures of buildings, and I had a lot of fun, but it's not something I'm particularly interested in. And also the thing that I noticed was I wasn't actually using it how it was originally designed to be used. I was using it to do some of the fun things you can do with it. What are those fun things? Well, you've probably heard of the tilt-shift effect. Mostly, that's just the tilt effect. And shift doesn't have a lot to do with it. And this is where you use it to control your depth of field in a very weird way. Sometimes it's called miniature effect because it makes things look tiny. Because we're used to seeing a very shallow depth of field on things that are tiny and very close up, like you get with a macro lens. And this is fun, but it's also really easy to do a good copy of it using Photoshop, for example. It's not perfect, but it's as good for Instagram, and I'm not using it for work. The other fun thing you can do with it is you can kind of get a little bit of a medium format look going on by using the shift to take 3 photos, for example. If you take a sort of panoramic photograph, as it were, without moving the camera, just moving the lens, you get a very, very good stitched panoramic. And if you use a camera like, say, an A7R III, you get like 100 megapixel image. Beautiful wide field of view as well, depending on which way you tilt the camera and which way you shift the lens. If, for example, you shift it in line with a landscape orientated camera, you get a very wide, medium format-ish looking image. If you do it opposed to that, so if you do it in line with the portrait orientated camera, for example, you get a wide but more traditional field of view. You can also shift it up and down, and you can get a vertical stack panoramic. And I have used it, and thinking about it is one of the only reasons I would quite like to keep this lens. You can use it to widen the field of view, and I have used it in the past of, a big product scene, for example, where maybe you don't have the room to get back, or you don't want to move back, you want to use that 45mm field of view. You can get a shot that's wide, that could be used as a website banner, which has a little bit of a medium format look to it. But there's one thing to be said here. There's many things to be said, but there's one thing I'm going to say. And that is that I have a medium format camera, and I've just ordered a 50mm lens for it. So even though that medium format camera may be only 20 megapixels, I'm thinking about it, and even a crop from that is more than enough to satiate the clients that are going to use those types of wide images as website banners, because honestly, they're going to want it sized in kilobytes, megabytes, or gigabytes, which if you start stitching together with this, you can actually get to. So I mentioned that you can get the miniature effect in Photoshop by just clicking some buttons. And yes, it does look better when you do it with this. You can also correct for that perspective with Photoshop as well, or with Capture One or Lightroom. It's easy. And if you're talking about delivering images for web use, and you're talking about shooting with an A7R III, 4, a Canon 5D SR, anything that's got over 30 megapixels, there's kind of no amount of that perspective shifting that you're going to be able to do that's going to mess up that image so that it can't be used for web. Printing maybe is a little bit different, but if you're doing stuff to print, then maybe don't listen to me. Yeah, maybe don't listen to me. Also, the opposite, the actual use case of the tilt, which I haven't got into, just realized, is to get more depth of field into your image. That makes sense, the way I've put that? Yeah, if you've got something laying flat, this is actually an example of this is better. You have this thing that's lay flat, and you just can't get, you want the 6 in, you want the Makita logo in. Maybe you just stop downloads. And that's kind of got it. But that's F22. And it's dark as shit. We want to use this maybe at F11. 6 is kind of in. Makita's kind of in. But you spin this around. You kind of dial this in. You go, alright. So maybe I kind of made that look easy because I've done this a lot. Now you have this. So it's all in. It's all there. Everything we want in focus is in focus. And that is at F11, and that's by shifting and giving the plane of focus a shift. Technically, this is tilt, and if you do it the other way, it's swing, just if you want to be technical about it. But this too can be faked with software. Have you heard of focus stacking? Because I have, and that makes me better than you. Just kidding. This is that miniature effect, by the way, that I was mentioning. You see how there's like a weird amount of blur? That's because I've tilted the lens. Technically, I've swung the lens because when it goes side to side, that's swing. I've swung it so that the plane of focus is like here as opposed to here. It's kind of technical. It's got a name. I'm not going to say the name because I'll get it wrong. But you see what I mean? This is that miniature effect. You can fake it. You can fake it easily. It doesn't look as good. I keep saying that. It doesn't look quite as good, but you can fake it. But also, you can fake the other thing that I just showed you with focus stacking. But it does look different. It is a different, slightly different. It looks slightly different. It's not really noticed. Most people aren't going to notice it, though. It's not that different. It's different, but it's not that different. The other thing is that focus stacking can go further than just the Schimflung principle can go. Because you could just keep stacking photos together until every single thing was in focus, which you can't do with this. Sometimes you still have to really open up the aperture on this. And when I said at the start that this was limiting, its tilt and its swing doesn't go far enough sometimes. Sometimes you need to focus stack even with this lens. So the reasons for and against. Let's do against. Against. This is a clunky bit of old technology that can be replicated. All the things you can do with it in photography can basically be replicated with software trickery. So having to get this out and use it and focus it can slow things down. In this form of camera control, of optical control, of it being built into a single lens, it's probably the most limiting and poorest example of tilt shift optical control. A technical camera goes much further and is much better and is going to take you to places easier than this ever would. But then the 4 column, the reason actually that I've kept this around is because, yes, in photography, it's very easy to duplicate the results you get from it. It isn't in video. So that example that I showed you of the Makita tool, multi-tool thing, I showed you that in video. I couldn't show you how I replicated that with focus stacking, because while technically I guess you could focus stack with video, I don't know how you do that. I don't think there's an easy way to do it, definitely. So if you need to control your plane of focus in video, kind of the only way, apart from a technical camera. The other positives are a little bit more ethereal. I am so glad that I learned to use lenses like this, to use movements in my optics with this lens or with a technical camera, with a large format studio camera. I'm really glad that I did that because I learned a lot from it. You saw how quick I was able to dial in the focus, the Schimflung principle on that multi-tool. It was kind of like second nature. I'm glad that I have that knowledge and that muscle memory sort of built in. And I think if you're getting started in something like architecture or food, product, maybe this is the way to go. If you've got stuff that's still and you want to learn how to photograph it well, you can go far worse than spending 450 quid on a lens like this. Yes, there are other lenses you could buy that maybe would take your career further, but as an investment in a way of learning and getting good images as you go, I think buying like a 24 or a 45 or a 90mm tilt shift, pretty good option. These lenses, because of just the fact that they are basically medium format lenses in a 35mm body, because they need that big the big image circle. When you're just using the center of that, you're getting the very best quality of that lens. They're actually really, really sharp lenses. They hold up really, really well in high megapixel digital cameras. But all of this combined is not enough, I don't think, for me to hang on to this lens at the moment. I would much prefer, if I thought that I was gonna have to do more photography with movements in, I would rather invest in something like a Cambo Actus or something similar to that, where you've got all of the control and you can change out the lenses so you have different focal lengths without having to just buy another tilt shift lens. Or maybe the Hasselblad system. That's kind of interesting. I would like to shoot more work on digital medium format. I think I would anyway. Maybe I wouldn't. So for now, it's not sticking around. But that's not to say you shouldn't own one. Laters. Just as I was wrapping up the edit on this video, I saw that Fuji announced a 30mm tilt shift for their GFX line. I'm sure this is going to be amazing, fantastic. Still has a couple of the problems that I mentioned in today's video. It was nice to see that tilt shift is still relevant. I'm just really glad to see someone's putting something out. I know there's third-party brands putting stuff out. I'm not always sure about them, so it's good to see someone. I think there's some rumours. I dug down a little. Seems like Canon's maybe going to put something out as well. Who knows? Interesting to see. Still think if you really want to get into tilt shift, it's a good entry into it. But if you're going to be doing lots of it, and you know you are, a camera system with movements is probably a better way to go.